Venga a mí tu palabra, en los labios abiertos que me buscan, para morder la rosa de los amaneceres. Venga a mí, en los ojos del joven que levanta la mano y pide la palabra, y confía sin más en las palabras. Por los años prohibidos, por las mentiras tristes que manchaban el aire como pájaros sucios, por los que se levantan con frío en las rodillas y por el exiliado que regresa, por su recuerdo herido al bajar del avión, venga a mí tu palabra. A mí, que quise hacerme hoy en primera persona del futuro perfecto con un libro de amor en el bolsillo, por los libros de Freud y Marx, por las guitarras de los cantautores, por los que salen a la calle y no se sienten vigilados, por el calor del cuerpo que aprendí a respetar mientras lo desarmaba con mi cuerpo, por los ojos brillantes de los antiguos humillados, por las banderas libres en las plazas, igual que peces de colores, por un país altivo, mayor de edad, pero con 20 años, por los viajes a Londres y a París, por los poemas de Cernuda, venga a mí tu palabra más limpia, más alegre, porque es el tiempo alegre de las palabras limpias. Los buitres han perdido su carroña de miedo. Parece que no tienen dónde ir y vuelan a esconderse muy lejos de nosotros, en la tumba más fría del pasado.
Basically, what have we learned? So hopefully we've gained this perspective. We've got 2 more people joining us. Okay, they're coming in. So I hope that the course, even though it has been so fast, so quick, we've barely had time to read anything at all, but hopefully we now have a sort of, a small image, a small view of what the poetry of the post-war period is. Any thoughts about this, about what we discussed at the very beginning, how this poetry had been accused of being of low quality, of being caduca? I didn't even know how to translate caduca, so a poetry that doesn't have much validity outside its time, that it's not sort of something that goes out of date very quickly. Any thoughts about that? No? Okay, so I'm assuming that we disagree with the fact that it's not a poetry of good quality, okay? And whether it's caduca or not, whether it still has validity, relevance, and influence, we will see it today, okay, with the poets that we will be looking at, and when Juan Carlos Abril joins us and talks to us about his own experience about this poetry. Okay. So Jose is trying to say something. He can hear me, but I cannot hear him. Jose, if you've got anything and you want to type it in the chat, that's absolutely fine. And if anyone has anything to say, please do the same. Okay. Just very quickly, I won't stop for a long time in here. I'm sure that you've heard, if you've read, one second, we've got something in the chat. Okay, Helen says, I think maybe at the time the works were underrated, but nowadays in a longer perspective, they offer a great insight. Thank you, Helen. That's a lovely review of this. That's a fantastic appreciation. Excellent, thank you. Okay, so if you read poetry, contemporary Spanish poetry, you will have come across, I'm sure, this term of poesía de la experiencia. Do you remember when we read in Luis Cernuda that quote where he was saying, teaching allowed me to understand how I had to offer my words as a tool to students so that they could recreate their experience, and the same applied to poetry. My role as a poet is not to tell the reader, what is my experience, but actually to give them the tools to re-experience, that experience, to feel it for themselves. So this was the sort of original understanding of poesía de la experiencia, and it's something that Jaime Gil de Viedma really worked on. Jaime Gil de Viedma actually named this. Reading a book by Robert Langbaum about the English Romantic poets, called The Poetry of Experience. He said this is actually what Luis Cernuda has been doing, and he was sort of the one that theorized this poetry of experience in Spanish poetry. What happened is that obviously Luis Cernuda continued to write in that trend, Gil de Viedma the same. In the 80s and 90s, the poets that said, you know, my experience, my day-to-day life, so this is poetry of experience, which is not exactly what Gil de Viedma and Cernuda were referring to. But this became, okay, a massive, massive trend that monopolized almost the Spanish contemporary field. And in a way, you know, it did have roots in the poetry of experience that Luis Cernuda and Gil de Viedma had started, but it wasn't completely the same. And Luis García Montero, who we'll see, is the poet of experience. Per excellence, like he has been known as the poet of experience. So we will talk about Luis García Montero in a second. I just see in the chat that Jose has written something, just one concept I'm interested in, reader as author. I think that any reader creates a short of new text when he or she is reading a classical one, depending on his experience, gender, class, etc. That's absolutely right, yeah. I think that is true. So, and I think that's exactly what Luis Cernuda wanted, yeah? They wanted the reader to sort of recreate that, yeah, with the right tools, so that a new element, a new poem, a new creation could be created. So that is a fascinating way of looking at poetry. Okay. So let's see what one of the poems by Luis García Montero. So Luis García Montero was born in Granada in 1958, and he's now the director of the Instituto Cervantes. He is an author that I have always admired. Well before he became the director of the Instituto Cervantes. I don't know if my obsession with poets whose first name is Luis has something to do with this, maybe, who knows. But since I was very young, I was really obsessed with Luis García Montero. I've added there just a selection of his poetry. He's also one of the professors at the University of Granada, although obviously now he's working for the Instituto Cervantes, but he's a professor at the Instituto de Granada, at the Universidad de Granada, teaching Spanish literature. So he also has a massive amount of critical publications on literature, etc. The poems, I've uploaded the PDF with loads of translations. Okay, Miriam seems to be having problems with the image. Maybe it's because I'm sharing the screen. Carlos, if you can you ask Miriam what the problem is?
Yep, of course.
Oh, thank you. Right, so let's read, let's try to read this poem, Democracia. And see, I've put on this presentation, Vigilar un examen, Democracia, and the poem from Balada en la Muerte de la Poesía. Did we all read Democracia? Yes? Okay, someone did, that's fine. Okay, so you've got the translations in the PDF. For all these poems, there were no translations available, so I've provided my own very simple translation. You might have, you know, a better one. But this poem is called Democracia, and he says, "Venga a mí tu palabra, en los labios abiertos que me buscan, para morder la rosa de los amaneceres. Venga a mí, en los ojos del joven que levanta la mano y pide la palabra, y confía sin más en las palabras. Por los años prohibidos, por las mentiras tristes que manchaban el aire como pájaros sucios, por los que se levantan con frío en las rodillas y por el exiliado que regresa, por su recuerdo herido al bajar del avión, venga a mí tu palabra. A mí, que quise hacerme hoy en primera persona del futuro perfecto con un libro de amor en el bolsillo, por los libros de Freud y Marx, por las guitarras de los cantautores, por los que salen a la calle y no se sienten vigilados, por el calor del cuerpo que aprendí a respetar mientras lo desarmaba con mi cuerpo, por los ojos brillantes de los antiguos humillados, por las banderas libres en las plazas, igual que peces de colores, por un país altivo, mayor de edad, pero con 20 años, por los viajes a Londres y a París, por los poemas de Cernuda, venga a mí tu palabra más limpia, más alegre, porque es el tiempo alegre de las palabras limpias. Los buitres han perdido su carroña de miedo. Parece que no tienen dónde ir y vuelan a esconderse muy lejos de nosotros, en la tumba más fría del pasado. It's a beautiful poem. It's almost like a prayer. Yeah, so it does feel like a prayer. The rhythm, the repetition, yeah, of this venga a mí tu palabra. Tu palabra is actually a term that we associate with religion, yeah, the sacred word, the Bible, etc. So we read this poem as a sort of prayer, but it's a prayer not in terms of religious. Is it in terms of democracy, would you say? Or it is actually about words, about being able to write, about poetry maybe, yeah? You will remember that we've read poems about this desire, yeah, to write poetry, to this commitment to words. The reason why I actually wanted to read this poem with you is because I think I mentioned this early in the course, one of the first days, how, you know, the time of the war, of the post-war period, has captured the imagination of people. Like, look at contemporary novels, yeah? The Civil War, the post-war period is the topic of so many historical novels, yeah? I've just read in the past couple of weeks a couple of novels, like the last novel by Almudena Grandes, La Madre de Frankenstein, a book about the post-war period. So the post-war period has this sort of a thematic influence on narrative and novels. It's a little bit the same on poetry, yeah? We see the post-war period reappearing. And Luis García Montero is talking about democracy, yes? So where do we know he's talking about democracy? He mentions un país altivo, mayor de edad. So a country that is democratic, has been democratic for over 18 years, yeah, but is still very young. This is what he means to say, yeah? So Spain came out of the dictatorship, but it's still a very, very young democracy. Okay, let me have, we have a couple of things in the chat. So Victor mentions Poesía de la Experiencia, La Otra Sentimentalidad. Yeah, we could be talking about this for hours. I actually wrote my PhD on Poesía de la Experiencia and La Otra Sentimentalidad, so I know that this would take hours to discuss, if not days, yeah? So it's good to have it in there. And Jose says that this could be titled A la inmensa mayoría. And the title and the author of the books about the Romantics, yeah, it's Robert Langbaum, and the book is actually called The Poetry of Experience. I can send the reference or upload the reference on Dropbox if you want as well. Yes, and the time was frozen now. everything is opening up, fantastic. As you can see, there are loads of references, yeah, to the post-war period as a sort of period that was very restrictive, yeah. This los ojos del joven que levanta la mano y pide la palabra, again these resonances to Blas de Otero, pido la paz y la palabra, y confía sin más en las palabras, like we now young people just doesn't have to wonder about what words they use, yeah. There's so this freedom to be able to use it. Los años prohibidos, las tristes mentiras. So this can actually, we can, oops, sorry, I mixed the screen. So we can be someone who is forced to pray, yeah, to kneel and pray, se levanta con frío en las rodillas. Also, we know that during the Spanish Civil War and the immediate years, tortures were widespread in Spain on both sides. So this, someone getting up con frío en las rodillas, could be a reference to that. What about the el exiliado que regresa por su recuerdo herido al bajar del avión? Any idea about that? I'll provide my explanation, okay? It doesn't mean that's the right one. I'll just provide my explanation. So the way I read this is, remember, so Franco died. So basically in Spain, Franco was not defeated. Franco died. It's very, very different. So the exiles that were coming back, it was not because the dictatorship had been defeated, but because the dictator had died and things had evolved from there, yeah? So it's a sort of bittersweet return, yeah, to Spain. You are coming to your country that it's free from the Francoist regime, but it's not, it doesn't feel like you've won anything. So that's, at least that's how I read it, this recuerdo herido al bajar del avión. But we keep having this venga a mí tu palabra. Books by Freud, Marx, which obviously were forbidden under Franco, the singer-songwriters, guitars, the same. The opportunities now to go out to the street without feeling like you are being observed or someone is judging you. Gender equality in there when he talks about aprendí a respetar el cuerpo mientras lo desarmaba con el mío. So loads of references to the actual post-war period as a theme. Obviously, Cernuda is mentioned there, yeah. But it's the almost the faith in words. It's actually not a very old poem. So he published it in Vista Cansada, which was published in 2008. It doesn't mean that obviously, you know, he might have written it ages ago. He always says that Vista Cansada, he wrote it when he turned 50 and he was just, you know, it was a review of everything he knew until then. I hope that, oh, Jose said something. There is a parallel development between biography and history. Yes, absolutely. And again, in Luis García Montero, just as in Gil de Viedma, we find these sort of two characters, yeah, whether it's the poet or the yo poético or García Montero. We did discuss being a victim, but also a culprit, being to blame for something. And Tina says being part of a system and powerless at the same time. Yeah, absolutely. And we also said in my group that there were resonances of Gil de Viedma, yeah, and the Apología y Petición, the references to history, how the history of Spain is always, you know, the most upsetting one because it never ends well. So hopefully this has given you a flavor of what sort of influence García Montero has received from these poets, whether it's the poets themselves or the themes. You have as well, we won't have time to read it because Juan Carlos Abril is waiting to come in. In this poem that you can see now on the screen, Las escaleras del metro suben a una ciudad desaparecida, you've got actually, I've uploaded the same poem twice, and as you will see in the second screen, I've highlighted the direct references to poets of the post-war period, mentioned in the poem. He says, it's this book, Balada en la muerte de la poesía, is a book that Luis García Montero wrote, and in the book, poetry has died, so poetry as a character has died, and the main character in the book, who is a poet, spends all his time in the book just trying to attend the funeral. Okay, so it's actually a dialogue with other poets, trying to establish a dialogue with current old poets, and in here, we have all these references to the authors of the post-war period. Oigo la música de una verdad fieramente humana, Ángel fieramente humano, one of the titles of Blas de Otero. We've got there esta desolación de la quimera, Luis Cernuda, estos poemas póstumos, Jaime Gil de Viedma, etc. So you can see the direct influences of all these poets in the poem. And as I said, obviously it doesn't appear like this in the book, So I've inserted between brackets the names so that you could see them very, very clearly, just to show you, the sort of influence. We won't have time to look at Pablo Cortina, but you've got all these on the PowerPoint. The video that you've got there on YouTube, it's not about the post-war period, but it's just so that you get a sense of what these poetry slams are all about, okay? So this is actually a poem about the royal family. So it's very funny if you want to read it. But the audio, the Estudios Superiores, is a poem about the post-war period, So it's the point of view of someone quite young, living in democratic Spain, but looking back at the post-war period, at what they can now enjoy. So he talks about poetic influences, etc. And he sent us a really nice version of the poem. Let's see if it plays. Read it if you've got, read it, listen to it if you've got time. It's quite interesting. And he sent us this version that he did with some musicians, etc. So that we can sort of enjoy it, okay? And it's a massive, massive pleasure for me to be able to bring you, even though it's virtually, Juan Carlos Abril to this course, as I explained before. So he will read one of his poems. I've translated it, a very, very basic translation so that you can all follow it. And then he will tell us about his sort of experiences with the post-war poets and their influence in his poetry. But just before we do that, and Juan Carlos will probably speak in Spanish, and then we will have to translate for those of you who don't speak Spanish. But that will be fine. So let me tell you a little bit about Juan Carlos. You've seen the slide. I'll bring up the slide. Actually, I can do it now, so that we can see Juan Carlos on the screen. So Juan Carlos is associate professor at the University of Granada, but obviously we have him here not just as a scholar, but as a poet, a really high profile role as an award-winning poet. He's one of the most important authors of his generation in Spain. Obviously also distinguished academic. He's written more than 50 articles in journals, over 30 book chapters, has edited 40 books as a scholar. So I'm really envious of everything he has done. But as a poet, you can see it on the screen. So he's published Un intruso nos somete, Laberinto Azul, Crisis, Poesía, 1997-2007, Esperar es un camino, En busca de una pausa. But his poems have also been included in the major anthologies of Spain of the past 20 years. So I'll just quote a couple of them. 10-30, La ruptura interior en la poesía de la experiencia, Yo es otro, Autorrelatos de la nueva poesía, 25 poetas españoles jóvenes, Sexta antología. And I'll just stop there because I've got a really long list. He's received major awards such as the Premio Federico García Lorca, the second prize of the Premio Donais, the Premio Poesía Ciudad de Alhama, the Premio Poesía Manuel Alcántara. So it is a true honor and pleasure to have you with us today, Juan Carlos. I don't know if you want to just jump in and read the poem, tell us something en español o en inglés, lo que tú quieras.
Well, the pleasure is mine. It's my pleasure. So thank you for the invitation. And maybe I feel more comfortable if I speak Spanish. So I prefer to change y hablar español, porque mi inglés es muy básico y me siento un poco inseguro, ¿no? Me siento un poco inseguro, aunque puedo así hablar un poquito, pues bueno, cuando vas a un restaurante o cuando tienes que pedir en el hotel, pues me muevo en inglés, sí, pero he perdido mucho inglés. Voy a leer el poema que ha traducido la profesora Diana, a quien le estoy muy agradecido por esta invitación, por este encuentro virtual en estos tiempos extraños, ¿verdad? Todo es virtual ahora y bueno, pues aquí nos vemos. Voy a leer un poema y a propósito de este poema voy a contar un poco mi experiencia con la poesía de posguerra española, pero también la experiencia que yo he tenido con la tradición inglesa, con Inglaterra, donde yo estuve viviendo en el año 2000 y 2001, estuve esos 2 años viviendo allí, fundamentalmente viví en Exeter, y fueron 2 años que, bueno, cuando volví de allí hablaba inglés medio bien, ahora lo he olvidado todo, pero este libro y este poema lo escribí allí, en Inglaterra.
Juan Carlos,
¿sí?
puedo, para los que no hablan inglés, voy a traducir un momento un resumen de lo que has dicho.
Muy bien.
Because I think there are a couple of you who don't speak any Spanish. So Juan Carlos is going to read the poem and then he'll tell us about the influences, not just of the poets of the post-war period, but also how much the English tradition actually has influenced his poetry, because he lived in 2000 and 2001 in Exeter. So he actually wrote this poem while living in England. So he will talk about that. Ya, todo tuyo.
Bueno, yo siempre admiré mucho la tradición inglesa, la tradición artística inglesa, no solo la tradición literaria, sino también, por ejemplo, la tradición pictórica. Por eso he traído para ilustrar este poema, en el que está inspirado, de hecho, el cuadro de Dante Gabriel Rossetti, de Proserpine, ¿no? Se dice en inglés, ¿no? Uh-huh. Y la tradición inglesa durante la modernidad siempre ha estado un poco relegada, hablo en general, en términos generales, por la tradición francesa. La tradición simbolista francesa era la gran tradición. Y a partir de finales del 19 empieza un poco a cambiar la cosa y de hecho incluso los poetas ingleses iban a París a vivir la vida bohemia, a vivir la vida artística, y París era el centro del mundo. Y a partir del siglo XX se desplaza el interés hacia la tradición inglesa, también pervive el interés por la tradición francesa, pero se desplaza un poco, y en ese sentido hay dos poetas que yo seguía bastante y sigo, que son Luis Cernuda y Jaime Gil de Viedma, que creo que habéis visto en este curso. Sí, si quieres traducir o...
Do we have any volunteers, actually, one of the native speakers that wants to translate, and you will do it a lot better than I can? No? Okay, I'll translate. So basically, Juan Carlos was saying that in the past, the most relevant tradition, the one that would influence poets the most in Spain, was the French one. But things changed, okay? And the English poets, the English tradition, started to exert a lot more influence on the Spanish tradition. So before even the English poets would go to Paris to learn from what was being done there, to get, you know, some sort of, maybe not inspiration, but definitely, you know, a push for what they were doing. But things changed very quickly, and the English tradition became the really most influential one. So he will tell us about his experience with the English tradition, and mainly how he got to it through Jaime Gil de Viedma and Luis Cernuda, who are poets that, as you know, we've looked at in the course.
Sí, entonces la tradición inglesa, como digo, pues me fue a mí interesando cada vez más. Y había dos, junto a la tradición inglesa, había otra cuestión que es la del coloquialismo, que mi poesía quizás no sea muy coloquial, o por lo menos la de este libro, pero sí me interesó siempre la cuestión de la tradición inglesa y la tradición artística inglesa, que es la que yo rescato en este poema. Por último, decir que acercarme a Luis Cernuda y a Jaime Gil de Viedma significó también acercarme a T.S. Eliot, ¿verdad? Al poeta norteamericano y nacionalizado inglés, T.S. Eliot, que es, digamos, pues, una de las influencias más importantes del siglo XX, no solo en lengua española, sino en cualquier lengua, ¿verdad? Uno de los poetas más importantes que hay.
So just to summarize all this, I'm getting lost because I'm just listening to you and then I forget that I'll have to translate. So basically he was saying that as well as learning about this English tradition when he was over here, that he was also quite obsessed with this idea of what we say colloquialismo, maybe, you know, the use of this day-to-day language, plain, ordinary use of the language, and that it was the English tradition, but through Gil de Viedma and Cernuda that he came across with T.S. Eliot, that he really got in touch with T.S. Eliot, who is obviously a massive influence, not just for himself, but for poetry in the 20th century.
Yes, Jaime Gil de Viedma translate Eliot into Spanish, so it was the way I went to the English art and English poems. And voy a leer, I'm going to read the poem and then we talk a little bit more. En una traducción excelente, que conste, una traducción excelente que ha hecho la profesora Diana Cullell, se titula Superandrógina, y como veis el cuadro en el que está inspirado es el mito de Proserpina. Si hay alguien que no lo recuerda y quiere que lo comentemos también, yo tampoco me lo sé de memoria, pero sí que me lo conozco bien, el mito, pero bueno, puedo explicarlo así a grandes rasgos. El mito de Proserpina, y es un poco la idea que yo desarrollo en el poema, el mito, ¿verdad? Los árboles caídos en el suelo se han podrido, sus ramas, melodía de droga sin descanso, obstruyen la vereda. Pero ¿qué prisa tienes? Vas hacia un fin excitado que revive. Es el infierno, es la primavera que ha sumergido en sus profundidades tu muerte siempre joven. Ha nacido otra vez. Vence tu piel itinerarios de tinieblas y acariciando la esperanza, en el imperio del humo hay una esfera herida, vuelves cantando. Es el infierno, es la primavera.
Estupendo. Bien. Sí, todos aplaudimos.
No sé si queréis leer la traducción o queréis que comentemos el poema o queréis incluso pues, que siga comentando un poco mi vínculo con la tradición inglesa a través de Gil de Viedma y bueno, pues el arte inglés, que también creo que es muy, muy interesante. Yo siempre he estado muy atraído. Yo mi primer viaje que tuve cuando tenía 18 años al extranjero, fuera de España, fue a Inglaterra, a Londres, ¿no? Yo tenía muchas ganas de visitar la Tate, la antigua Tate, ¿no? Que luego ya la desdoblaron en Tate Modern y la Tate normal, y fue mi viaje de ensueño, ¿verdad? Visitar Londres y visitar los museos londinenses. Así que siempre he estado fascinado por el arte inglés en general y sobre todo los prerrafaelitas.
Okay, so he's given us the different possibilities here, so we can listen to the poem in English. If anyone fancies reading the translation, we can discuss the poem in more depth, maybe linking it to the English tradition. He was saying how he has always been really passionate about the English literary tradition, but also, you know, the English culture, and how his first trip abroad when he turned 18 was to London to visit the Tate Museum, because he has this fascination with English traditions of all sorts. Juan Carlos, ¿nos puedes contar un poco del mito?
Un poco, sí. Y la relación que tiene con Eliot, ¿verdad? Que fue de donde yo... Pues, hay un libro fundamental escrito por un inglés que es The Golden Bough, ¿no? La rama dorada, de Fraser, ¿no? Se escribe The Golden Bough. Sí, es un libro de antropología filosófica, los inicios de la antropología moderna, a finales del 19 y principios del 20, que marca el inicio de la antropología. Ese libro, sobre todo una parte, porque Fraser, que se pronuncia, perdón, Fraser dedicó toda su vida a escribir ese libro y escribió 26 volúmenes, ¿no? Entonces es un libro, yo no lo había visto hasta que estuve en Inglaterra, que fui a una biblioteca pública y vi allí los 26 volúmenes en la librería y dije, Dios mío, porque en español tenemos una edición de 900 páginas, bueno, no es poco, ¿no? Pero en el Fondo de Cultura Económica, una versión en resumen, ¿verdad? Es un resumen. Pero cuando yo estuve allí, como digo, me cercioré que efectivamente él dedicó toda su vida. Bueno, pues una parte de ese libro lo leyó una profesora de filosofía que se llamaba Jessie L. Weston, que escribió un libro que se llamaba From Romance to Ritual. Es un libro que influyó mucho en toda la generación del modernismo, ¿no? Lo que es Eliot y toda esta gente que estaba viviendo en Inglaterra, sobre todo la parte que dedicaba a la reconstrucción de cómo se asociaban los ciclos vegetales con los mitos, ¿no? Cómo los ciclos vegetales, la primavera, el verano, el invierno, se explicaban a través de los mitos. En concreto, el mito de Proserpina explica la regeneración de la naturaleza cada año. Proserpina era la hija de Demeter, la diosa de las cosechas, entre otras cosas, y estaba, quiero resumir, ¿no? Estaba cantando y cogiendo flores en un prado. Se dice que en Sicilia hay un sitio, hay una laguna, en Perusa que se llama, ahí dicen que es donde estaba, y fue raptada por el Hades, ¿verdad? La raptó y la llevó al infierno, y una vez que estaba en el infierno podías salir, pero si comías algo te tenías que quedar. Entonces, cuando la madre se enteró de que no estaba su hija y de que estaba raptada, paró el tiempo, paró los ciclos vegetales del tiempo y se quedó todo en un invierno. Todo el mundo conocido se quedó en un invierno. Entonces, los dioses y los humanos pues, fueron a hablar con ella y con Zeus, porque, claro, así no podía estar el mundo, ¿verdad? Sin todo invierno. Entonces le explicaron que efectivamente Proserpina estaba secuestrada en el infierno, que si quería ir a por ella, pues podía ir para que ella subiera otra vez hacia la tierra del submundo, que subiera del submundo, pero como Proserpina, como veis en el cuadro de Gabriel Rossetti, había comido unos granos de la granada, ¿verdad? No me acuerdo cómo se dice granada en inglés, no me acuerdo.
Pomegranate.
Pomegranate.
Yeah.
Pues ese es el fruto. Hay unas tradiciones que dicen que 3 granos, 9 granos, 5 granos, bueno, da igual, con que te comieras uno solo ya te quedaba en el infierno. Entonces, te tenías que quedar en el infierno. Las malas lenguas dicen que en el fondo ella quería quedarse en el infierno y por eso se comió los granos, ¿verdad? Porque era mucho más divertido estar con su pareja en el infierno que en la tierra, ¿verdad? Pero el caso es que al final llegaron a un acuerdo Hades y Demeter, ¿verdad? Para que pasara la mitad del tiempo en la tierra y la otra mitad en el submundo. Y esa es la explicación del por qué se renuevan los ciclos vegetales. Cuando Proserpina bajaba para estar con su esposo, pues era el otoño y la primavera, y el invierno, perdón. Y cuando subía para estar en la tierra, pues era la primavera y el verano, ¿verdad? Se renovaban los ciclos vegetales. Esa es la explicación del mito.
Help translating this, please. For those who don't speak English, there is no way I will be able to translate that. So I'll just focus on the myth. So for those of you who are not very familiar with the myth, this is the Greek version. So she was kidnapped by Hades. Thank you. So she was kidnapped and she had to stay in hell. You were not allowed out of hell if you had eaten anything. So the mother, who was in charge of the whole cycle, the seasons, the harvesting, stopped the whole world, put it in a standby. So that she wasn't able to eat anything, but she had already eaten a tiny bit of pomegranate. Okay, so you know, it was far too late for her, and the sort of agreement that was reached was that she would be able to come out of hell for half of the year, and that explains why we have this cycle in seasons. Yeah, why we've got production for half of the year and then winter. It is actually a beautiful myth. It is a beautiful one. Ok, aquí mi traducción cutre por encima.
No, al contrario, ha estado perfecta. And that's the myth we can see in this picture from Dante Gabriel Rossetti, no? Okay? But you know, it's porque siempre se le siempre se le acusó a los modelos de Rossetti, siempre se le acusó de ser muy masculina. ¿Veis? Como esta modelo, ¿verdad? Era como muy masculina, tiene como en fin, hay diferentes versiones, ¿no? Y por eso yo también en la androginia, ¿no? Plasmé también más el título del cuadro en el título. Y cuando hace poco que estuve en Londres, bueno, hace un año por ahí, precisamente fui de nuevo a la Tate, ¿no? a la otra ya, y estuve viendo de nuevo este magnífico cuadro, y bueno, que a mí siempre me ha apasionado. Como veis, ella tiene la granada en la mano y no la suelta, ¿eh? Ella tiene muy claro que la granada es su símbolo, ¿verdad? Esa es lo que yo decía ahí de la esfera herida, ¿verdad? La wounded orb, ¿verdad? Esa granada.
And you might, I mean, we did discuss whether that was the right translation. So some of you might have different ideas of how this could have been translated. I did discuss with Juan Carlos whether we needed circle, sphere, ball, fruit. So we opted for that because it sort of conveyed the message without changing too much of the original. But if you have other suggestions, feel free, please. Okay. Adelante, Juan Carlos.
Pues bueno, yo quería un poco recordar esa tradición hacia lo inglés, que es muy importante a partir de la poesía, en la poesía de posguerra y hasta hoy día. Y hay otra tradición, también por supuesto, que en la que también se ascribe T.S. Eliot, que es la de lo que se conoce como la poesía de la experiencia, ¿verdad? Eso es The Poetry of Experience, que es un poco la tradición también muy inglesa, esa que se remonta pues a todos los poetas del siglo XIX, pues no sé, quiero recordar ahora por ejemplo a Tennyson o a algún otro más, ahora no recuerdo, pero todo lo que es a Browning, ¿verdad? A Browning, toda la tradición del monólogo dramático, ¿verdad? Y esa tradición que retoma luego también Eliot y que es tan importante en el desarrollo de la poesía, de la experiencia desde Cernuda, Gil de Viedma, hasta hoy en día, de una manera u otra, ha sido la tradición más importante en lengua, sobre todo en España, pero también podría decirse que en lengua española ha tenido muchísima importancia.
We were actually discussing this, yeah, when we mentioned that I did talk about Poetry of Experience and Robert Langbaum's book on the Romantic poets in English called Poetry of Experience, yeah, which Jaime Gil de Viedma actually used to name the Spanish trend. I've really enjoyed teaching this course. If you've got any feedback, anything that you want to let us know, please do get in touch. Carlos and myself would be very happy to hear about your thoughts, ideas for other courses, maybe for Carlos, but any feedback that you have, please do go ahead, get in touch. Everyone has my email address, and I would be very happy to hear from you. But it's been an amazing pleasure. So it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.